The gunshot echoed across the plains as Rowan Caldwell pulled the trigger, another notch in a past he couldn't outrun. The year was 1876, and the blood on his hands had long since dried, but the memories remained fresh as morning dew. He'd come to White River, Colorado, seeking anonymity, a place where the name Rowan Caldwell wouldn't cause saloon doors to swing shut or mothers to usher their children indoors. But redemption, he'd learned, was as elusive as rain in a drought. "You're getting rusty, Caldwell," he muttered to himself, holstering his revolver after finishing his daily target practice on the outskirts of town. His horse, a chestnut mare named Penny, nickered softly as he ran a hand down her neck. "Don't you start judging me too, girl." White River was a town like many others sprouting across the Westbourne of Silver, sustained by cattle, and seasoned with the particular blend of hope and desperation that defined the frontier. Nestled in a valley with the snow-capped Rocky Mountains standing sentinel in the distance, it had the makings of a place where a man might start over. That's what Rowan had thought when he'd arrived 3 months earlier. He'd been wrong. The whispers had started within a week. Someone had recognized him from a wanted poster long since expired, and though the bounty on his head had been settled with the law, public opinion rendered its own verdicts. The former gunslinger and outlaw found doors closed, conversations halted, and eyes averted. He'd found work at the livery stable on the edge of town, the only place that would hire him, and settled into a solitary existence. Rowan guided Penny back toward town as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty road. His small cabin lay just beyond the livery, a place as sparse and unwelcoming as his life had become. As he approached the main street, he spotted a commotion outside the general store. A wagon had arrived, heavily laden with crates and trunks, a sure sign of new arrivals. He might have ridden past without a second glance had he not seen her. She stood amidst the chaos, directing 2 men where to place her belongings, her honey blonde hair catching the sunlight. She wore a practical traveling dress of deep blue, dusty from the trail but well made. There was something in the way she held herself, straight-backed and confident, that made Rowan pull Penny to a halt. The woman turned, sensing his gaze, and for a moment their eyes met. Hers were a clear hazel that seemed to look right through him. Rowan tipped his hat instinctively before nudging Penny forward, uncomfortable with the sudden scrutiny. "Mr. Harrington," he heard her call to one of the men, "please be careful with that trunk. My father's books are irreplaceable." The name Harrington was familiar, the banker who'd arrived in White River a year prior, bringing Eastern money and ambition to the growing town. Rowan had done business with him exactly once, when he'd opened a modest account upon his arrival. The banker had been civil but distant, the same treatment Rowan received from most respectable folk. The next morning brought Rowan to work before dawn, as it always did. The livery owner, a gruff man named Samuel Gates, had hired Rowan despite his reputation, or perhaps because of it. Gates wasn't one for conversation, which suited Rowan fine. Their arrangement was simple. Rowan worked hard, Gates paid him fair, and neither asked questions about the other's past. "Got a new boarder coming in today," Gates informed him, chewing on a piece of straw as Rowan mucked out the stalls. Banker Harrington's sister just arrived from Boston, bringing her horse over this morning. Rowan nodded, absorbing this information with feigned indifference. So the woman he'd seen yesterday was Harrington's sister. That explained the quality of her clothing and the deference shown by the men unloading her belongings. "I want you to take special care of her mount," Gates continued. "Harrington's been good for business in this town, wouldn't hurt us to stay on his good side." "Understood," Rowan replied, though he suspected his involvement would be precisely what might jeopardize that goodwill. An hour later, the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats approached the livery. Rowan was brushing down a client's palomino when she appeared in the doorway, leading a magnificent black thoroughbred. Sunlight streamed in behind her, momentarily transforming her into a silhouette before his eyes adjusted. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying the refined tones of Eastern education. "I'm looking for Mr. Gates." "He's in the office," Rowan replied, gesturing toward the small room at the back of the stable, "but I can help you with your horse if you'd like." She studied him with those penetrating hazel eyes, taking in his worn clothing and the calluses on his hands. "You work here?" "I do." "And you are Rowan Caldwell, madam." She didn't flinch at the name, which told Rowan she hadn't yet been warned about the town's resident outlaw. That would change soon enough. "I'm Beatrice Harrington," she said, extending a gloved hand which Rowan hesitated to take, aware of the dirt under his fingernails and the sweat on his brow. She seemed to sense his discomfort and dropped her hand with a small smile. "This is Midnight. He's been with me since he was a colt, and he's rather particular about who handles him." "Most good horses are," Rowan said, turning his attention to the thoroughbred. "May I?" She nodded, and Rowan approached the horse slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. Midnight's ears flicked forward with interest, and he allowed Rowan to stroke his neck, the coat gleaming like polished onyx beneath his touch. "He likes you," Beatrice observed, surprise evident in her voice. "He's usually quite standoffish with strangers." "Animals tend to be better judges of character than people," Rowan said, the words escaping before he could reconsider them. "Is that so?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of her mouth. "And what character has Midnight judged you to possess, Mr. Caldwell?" Before Rowan could respond, Gates emerged from the office, wiping his hands on a rag. "Miss Harrington, welcome to White River. I see you've met my stable hand." "Indeed I have," she replied, her eyes lingering on Rowan for a moment longer than necessary. "Mr. Caldwell was just about to tell me what my horse thinks of him." Gates shot Rowan a warning glance. "Caldwell's the best with horses in 3 counties, Miss Harrington. Your Midnight will be in good hands here." "I'm pleased to hear it," she said. "I'll be staying with my brother for the foreseeable future. I'd like to ride daily, weather permitting." "Of course," Gates assured her. "Caldwell can have him ready for you each morning if that suits." Beatrice turned to Rowan again. "Would 9 o'clock be agreeable, Mr. Caldwell?" "Yes, madam," he answered, surprised by the direct address. Most clients spoke to Gates as if Rowan were invisible. "Excellent, then I shall see you tomorrow morning." With a final nod, she turned and walked out of the livery, her skirts swishing against the straw-covered floor. Gates watched her go before turning to Rowan. "Remember what I said about staying on Harrington's good side? That goes double now. Banker finds out his sister's horse is being tended by the likes of you, he'll move his business elsewhere faster than you can say notorious." "I'm not notorious," Rowan muttered, leading Midnight to an empty stall. "Not anymore." "Tell that to the ghosts of the men you put in the ground," Gates retorted, but there was no real heat in his words. He'd hired Rowan knowing full well who he was, and in his own way, he'd given him a chance few others would. Rowan spent the rest of the day focusing on his work, but his thoughts kept drifting to Beatrice Harrington and the way she'd looked at him not through him or away from him, but directly at him, as if he were worthy of her attention. It was a novel sensation, and one he didn't trust. The next morning arrived with a pale sky promising rain later in the day. Rowan was ready with Midnight at precisely 9 o'clock, the thoroughbred groomed to perfection, and saddled with the elegant tack Beatrice had provided. He stood outside the livery, holding the reins, scanning the street for any sign of her. She appeared on foot, walking briskly from the direction of the large white house on the hill where the banker lived. She'd traded yesterday's traveling dress for a riding habit of forest green, her hair pinned neatly beneath a matching hat. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she greeted him, her cheeks flushed from the walk or perhaps the cool morning air. "I see Midnight is ready for our ride." "As promised," Rowan replied, offering his hand to help her mount. She took it without hesitation, her touch light through the leather of her gloves, and swung gracefully into the saddle. "Will you not be joining me?" she asked, settling her skirts. Rowan blinked in confusion. "Joining you?" "On the ride," she clarified. "I'm new to this area and I'd welcome a guide who knows the terrain, unless you have other duties that prevent you." He glanced back at the livery, where Gates was watching from the doorway with a bemused expression. The older man shrugged and waved him off. "Go on then. Show the lady around. Be back by noon, we've got a delivery coming in." Minutes later, Rowan was mounted on Penny, leading Beatrice out of town toward the rolling hills to the east. They rode in companionable silence for a while, Rowan occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming distant peaks. How long have you been in White River, Mr. Caldwell? Beatrice asked as they paused atop a rise overlooking a meadow dotted with late summer wildflowers. About 3 months, he answered, keeping his gaze fixed on the horizon. And yourself? I arrived yesterday, as you know, she said with a smile in her voice. I've come to help my brother with his growing family. His wife is expecting their third child and she's been unwell. They have a 4-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter who require more energy than she can muster at present. That's kind of you, Rowan commented. It's what family does, she replied simply. And I confess I was eager for a change of scenery. Boston can be rather stifling for a woman of independent mind. Rowan glanced at her then, noting the determined set of her jaw and the spark in her eyes. And White River isn't stifling. That remains to be seen, she said with a small laugh. Though I suspect a frontier town offers certain freedoms not available in Eastern society. For instance, I doubt many Boston ladies go riding alone with men they've just met. Is that what we're doing, riding alone? Rowan looked around at the empty landscape. I hadn't noticed. Her laugh was fuller this time, genuine and warm. You're not what I expected, Mr. Caldwell. What did you expect? I'm not entirely sure, she admitted, but my brother warned me about you this morning, said you were dangerous and I should keep my distance. Rowan's jaw tightened. And yet here you are. Here I am, she agreed. I've never been one to let others form my opinions for me, Mr. Caldwell. I prefer to draw my own conclusions. And what conclusion have you drawn so far? She studied him thoughtfully. That you're a man with secrets and regrets. That you're gentle with horses and respectful to women. And that whatever you've done in the past, you're trying to leave it behind. Her assessment was so accurate it left Rowan momentarily speechless. Rain clouds were gathering on the horizon, and he used them as an excuse to change the subject. We should head back. Storm's coming. They turned their horses toward town, picking up the pace as the first distant rumbles of thunder reached them. By the time they reached the livery, fat raindrops were beginning to fall, and Beatrice's hair had come partially loose from its pins, golden tendrils framing her face. Thank you for the tour, Mr. Caldwell, she said as he helped her dismount. Perhaps we could ride again tomorrow. Before he could answer, a stern voice cut through the pattering of rain on the livery roof. Beatrice, what are you doing? Banker Richard Harrington stood in the entrance, his expression thunderous as he looked from his sister to Rowan. He was a tall man with carefully groomed side whiskers and the well-fed look of prosperity. I'm returning from a morning ride, Richard, Beatrice replied calmly. Mr. Caldwell was kind enough to show me some of the local landscape. Alone with him. Richard's emphasis left no doubt about his feelings regarding Rowan. We discussed this, Beatrice. This man is not suitable company for a lady. Beatrice's chin lifted defiantly. I am quite capable of choosing my own company, brother, and Mr. Caldwell has been nothing but a perfect gentleman. Richard stepped forward, taking his sister's arm. We'll discuss this at home. Gates, he called to the livery owner who had appeared behind Rowan. I expect you to exercise better judgment in the future. My sister's horse should be cared for by someone more appropriate. With respect, sir, Gates began, but Richard was already leading Beatrice away, her protests fading as they disappeared into the increasingly heavy rain. Well, Gates said after a moment, that went about as well as could be expected. Rowan said nothing, leading both horses into the stable to dry and brush them down. His hands worked automatically while his mind replayed the morning's events. He hadn't expected to enjoy Beatrice's company as much as he had, nor had he anticipated the fierce disappointment he now felt at the prospect of not seeing her again. Don't take it personal, Gates said, watching Rowan's methodical grooming of midnight. Harrington's got social ambitions. Last thing he wants is his unmarried sister associating with a man of your colorful background. I understand, Rowan replied, keeping his voice neutral. It's how things work. Gates shook his head. Doesn't make it right. Man ought to be judged on who he is, not who he was. The words were unexpected from the usually taciturn stable owner, and Rowan looked at him with surprise. Gates merely shrugged and turned away. Delivery's been delayed on account of the weather. Take the afternoon if you want it. Rowan declined the offer, preferring the distraction of work to his own thoughts. He spent the day repairing tack, cleaning stalls, and assisting the few customers who braved the steady rainfall. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving behind puddles that reflected the emerging stars and a clean, washed scent in the air. He was closing up the livery when he heard footsteps approaching. Turning, he found Beatrice standing in the doorway, a shawl drawn over her shoulders against the evening chill. "Miss Harrington," he said, unable to hide his surprise. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I imagine not after my brother's behavior," she replied, stepping inside. "I've come to apologize for Richard. He's protective to a fault." "No apology necessary," Rowan assured her. "Your brother has every right to be concerned about your associations." Beatrice sighed, moving closer. "Richard sees the world in black and white, Mr. Caldwell. Good and bad, respectable and disreputable. I find such distinctions rarely apply so neatly to actual people." "Sometimes they do," Rowan said quietly. "Your brother's not wrong about me, Miss Harrington. I've done things I'm not proud of. Haven't we all?" she countered. "The question is whether you're the same man now who did those things then." Rowan closed the stall door he'd been securing, turning to face her fully. "What makes you think I'm not?" "The way midnight responded to you," she said simply. "The way you speak softly, thoughtfully. The respect in your manner. These aren't the traits of a dangerous man, Mr. Caldwell. With all due respect, Miss Harrington, you don't know me." "No," she admitted. "But I'd like to." The declaration hung between them, earnest and unexpected. Rowan found himself at a loss for words, caught between the longing her statement awakened and the certainty that pursuing any connection with Beatrice Harrington would only lead to trouble. "That wouldn't be wise," he finally said, "for either of us." Disappointment flickered across her features before she composed herself. "Perhaps not, but wisdom has never been my strongest virtue, Mr. Caldwell." She turned to leave, then paused. "I'll be riding at 9 o'clock tomorrow, with or without an escort." She was gone before he could respond, leaving behind only the lingering scent of lavender and the echo of her challenge. The following morning, Rowan had midnight saddled and ready at 9 o'clock, but he remained inside the livery, watching through the window as Beatrice approached. She wore a riding habit of deep burgundy today, her hair braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. She hesitated at the entrance, looking around expectantly. Gates appeared at Rowan's shoulder. "You're a fool if you let that one ride out alone." "I'm a fool if I don't," Rowan countered. "Maybe so," the older man conceded. "But being a fool never stopped a man from doing what his heart tells him is right." With a grunt of frustration, Rowan grabbed Penny's reins and led both horses outside. Beatrice's face brightened when she saw him, though she quickly schooled her expression into one of casual acknowledgement. "Mr. Caldwell," she greeted him, "I wasn't certain you'd join me today." "Neither was I," he admitted, helping her mount. "Your brother won't approve." "My brother is occupied with bank business until noon," she informed him with a mischievous glint in her eye. "What he doesn't know won't distress him." They rode west this time toward a small lake nestled in the foothills. The morning was clear and crisp, the landscape vibrant after yesterday's rain. As they rode, Beatrice drew Rowan into conversation about his life before White River. He found himself sharing carefully edited versions of his childhood on a small ranch in Texas, learning to ride almost before he could walk, the drought that had claimed his family's land and eventually his parents' lives. "How did you end up?" Beatrice hesitated, clearly searching for a delicate way to phrase her question. "An outlaw," Rowan finished for her. "It wasn't a single decision, Miss Harrington. It was 100 small choices, each one taking me further from the path I should have followed." "And what led you to White River?" Rowan was silent for a long moment, considering how much to reveal. "A desire to stop running," he finally said. "To find a place where I might live honestly, if not respectably." "Those two things should be synonymous," she observed. "Perhaps in an ideal world," he agreed. "But we live in this one, where a man's past casts a long shadow." They reached the lake and dismounted, allowing the horses to drink while they walked along the shore. Beatrice collected smooth stones and attempted to skip them across the water's surface, laughing at her failed attempts. Rowan demonstrated the proper technique, his stone bouncing 5 times before sinking. Show off, she teased, trying again and managing 3 skips. Ha, I'm improving. You are indeed, he said, smiling despite himself at her enthusiasm. They continued their walks each morning for nearly 2 weeks, exploring different areas around White River, a hidden waterfall, an abandoned miner's cabin, a meadow where wild horses sometimes grazed. Each day, Rowan told himself it would be the last, that he was risking too much her reputation, his precarious position in the community, his own carefully guarded heart. Yet each morning, he found himself saddling the horses, waiting for her arrival with an anticipation that was both unfamiliar and increasingly difficult to deny. Beatrice, for her part, seemed to bloom in his company, sharing stories of her life in Boston, her education at a progressive women's college, her reluctance to follow the conventional path of marriage and motherhood that society had laid out for her. She spoke of her dreams to write, perhaps for one of the women's journals that were gaining popularity back east. I want my life to have meaning beyond social calls and domestic duties, she confessed one morning as they rested beneath a cottonwood tree. Is that terribly modern and unwomanly of me? I'm hardly qualified to judge what's proper for a woman, Rowan replied, but I can't imagine you being content with anything less than a life that challenges your mind and spirit. She looked at him with such warmth then that Rowan had to glance away, uncomfortable with the emotions her gaze stirred in him. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, and Beatrice Harrington was dismantling them brick by brick. Their idyll couldn't last, of course. The reckoning came on a Saturday morning when they returned from their ride to find Richard Harrington waiting at the livery, his face a mask of cold fury. So this is where you've been disappearing to each morning, he said to Beatrice as Rowan helped her dismount. Deliberately deceiving me to spend time with a known criminal. Richard, please, Beatrice began, but her brother cut her off. No, Beatrice, this ends now. He turned to Rowan, his voice dropping to a menacing pitch. Stay away from my sister, Caldwell. Your kind isn't welcome in decent society. My kind, Rowan repeated, a familiar anger stirring in his chest, the same anger that had led him down dangerous paths before. Murderers, thieves, men without honor or principle. That's not who he is, Beatrice protested, stepping between them. If you'd just listen, I've heard enough, Richard snapped. Get in the carriage, Beatrice, we're going home. No, she stood her ground, chin lifted in defiance. I'm not a child, Richard, you can't order me about. While you're under my roof, you'll abide by my rules, her brother insisted. And my most important rule is that my sister does not associate with men who have killed for money. The accusation hung in the air, and Rowan saw the question in Beatrice's eyes as she turned to look at him. He couldn't deny it, his past included blood money, though the full story was more complicated than Richard's simplistic portrayal suggested. Is it true? She asked quietly. Rowan nodded, unable to lie to her. Yes. The single word seemed to deflate her, and Richard seized the opportunity to take her arm, leading her toward the waiting carriage. This time she didn't resist, though she looked back once at Rowan, her expression a mixture of hurt and confusion that cut him deeper than any bullet ever had. You're fortunate I don't run you out of town, Richard called back to Rowan. Stay away from my sister, or next time I won't be so lenient. Rowan watched the carriage drive away, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Gates appeared beside him, chewing thoughtfully on his ever-present piece of straw. Reckon that was bound to happen sooner or later, the livery owner commented. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Nothing, Rowan said flatly. Harrington's right. I'm not the kind of man who should be courting a lady like Beatrice. That what you were doing, courting her? Rowan hadn't thought of it in those terms, but he realized with a jolt that yes, that was exactly what had been happening. Their morning rides, their long conversations, the gradual lowering of his defenses, it had all been leading somewhere he'd never expected to go again. Doesn't matter now, he muttered, leading the horses into the stable. It's over. But it wasn't over, not entirely. That evening, as Rowan sat on the small porch of his cabin watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of crimson and gold, he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Looking up, he was startled to see Beatrice making her way toward him, a determined expression on her face. He stood as she approached, his heart racing despite his best efforts to remain calm. "Miss Harrington, you shouldn't be here." "I know," she acknowledged, stopping a few feet away, "but I needed to speak with you to understand." "There's nothing to understand," Rowan said, his voice harsher than he intended. "Your brother told you the truth. I've killed men for money. I've robbed stagecoaches and trains. I'm exactly what he says I am." "I don't believe that," she insisted. "Not the man I've come to know these past 2 weeks." "Then you don't know me at all," he replied, turning away from her. "Go home, Beatrice, forget you ever met me." "I can't do that," she said, moving closer. "Not until you tell me your story, the whole story. Not the sanitized version you've been sharing on our rides, but the truth. I deserve that much." Rowan looked at her for a long moment, taking in her determined expression, the way the fading light turned her hair to spun gold, the fierce intelligence in her eyes. She deserved the truth, yes, but could she handle it? More importantly, could she forgive it? "Sit down," he finally said, gesturing to the pair of rough-hewn chairs on his porch. "It's not a pretty tale." For the next hour, as darkness settled over the land and crickets began their nightly chorus, Rowan told Beatrice everything. How after his parents died, he'd fallen in with a gang of outlaws led by a charismatic man named Jackson Cole. How at first it had been small crimes, stealing cattle, robbing travelers, but gradually escalated to more violent offenses. How he'd believed Cole's philosophy that they were merely taking from the rich what they'd unfairly hoarded, redistributing wealth in a way the law never would. "I was young and angry," Rowan explained, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I told myself we were helping people, giving money to poor farmers, widows, orphans. Some of that was true, but we kept plenty for ourselves, and the deeper we got, the more violent Cole became." He told her about the bank robbery in Tucson that had gone wrong, how Cole had shot the teller without provocation, how Rowan had been forced to kill a deputy in self-defense. He described the growing unease he'd felt as Cole's methods became increasingly brutal, culminating in an attack on a stagecoach carrying a young family. "That was my breaking point," Rowan said, his voice tight with remembered anguish. "Cole wanted to kill them all, even the children. I couldn't do it. We fought and I shot him. The family escaped, but 3 of my former gang members died that day by my hand." He fell silent, waiting for Beatrice's reaction: disgust, fear, rejection. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady, and after that, "I turned myself in to the territorial marshal," Rowan continued, surprised by her calm response. "Made a deal information about the remaining gang members in exchange for a reduced sentence. Spent 5 years in prison, and when I got out, I tried to start over. But everywhere I went, someone would recognize me or word would spread about my past. So I kept moving, taking odd jobs, staying a few months before the whispers and sideways glances became too much to bear. Until White River," Beatrice said. "Yes, I thought maybe this time would be different. But it never is." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, absorbing everything he'd told her. When she finally spoke, her words took Rowan by surprise. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said. "It can't have been easy." "That's all you have to say?" Rowan asked incredulously. "What would you have me say? That I'm appalled, frightened? I won't pretend your past doesn't trouble me, Rowan, but the man who shot Cole to save a family isn't the same one who joined the gang years earlier. People change. They grow. They learn from their mistakes." "Some mistakes can't be undone," Rowan said, standing and pacing the small porch. "The men I've killed are still dead. Their families still mourn them." "Yes," Beatrice agreed solemnly, "and you'll carry that burden for the rest of your life. But it doesn't define all that you are or all that you can become." Her words stirred something in Rowan's chest, a tiny flame of hope he'd thought long extinguished, but reality quickly doused it. "None of that matters. Your brother will never allow you to associate with me, and he's right not to. You have a future ahead of you, Beatrice. A good one. Don't tarnish it by connecting yourself to someone like me." "Shouldn't that be my decision?" she challenged, rising to face him. "I'm a grown woman, Rowan. I can choose for myself who I wish to know, to care for." The implication of her words hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and danger. Rowan took a step back, maintaining distance between them. "Go home, Beatrice," he said gently, "for both our sakes." She studied his face in the dim light spilling from his cabin window, searching for something. Whatever she saw made her shoulders slump slightly. If that's what you truly want. It wasn't what he wanted. It was the furthest thing from what he wanted, but it was what had to be done. It is. She nodded once, a jerky motion betraying her emotion, and turned to leave. At the edge of the porch, she paused. I'll be moving to Denver next week. My brother's wife has recovered sufficiently, and I've accepted a position as a teacher at a girls' school there. I just thought you should know. Before Rowan could respond, she was gone, her figure quickly swallowed by the darkness. He stood motionless for a long time, listening to her retreating footsteps, fighting the urge to call her back, to tell her that of course it wasn't what he wanted, that he'd never wanted anything more than to be worthy of her regard. But he remained silent, returning to his chair to watch the stars emerge one by one in the vast Colorado sky, each one a distant, unreachable point of light, much like happiness itself. The next week passed in a haze of work and sleepless nights. Rowan avoided the main streets of White River, taking his meals in his cabin rather than the cafe where he might encounter Beatrice. He worked longer hours than usual, exhausting himself physically in hopes that it might quiet his mind. It didn't. On Friday afternoon, Gates found him replacing worn boards in one of the stalls. Harrington was here earlier, the livery owner said without preamble. Says his sister's leaving on tomorrow's stage for Denver. Rowan continued hammering, not trusting himself to speak. Also said her horse will be staying here until he can arrange for transport to Denver. Asked specifically that you not handle the animal anymore. That made Rowan pause, the hammer suspended mid-swing. That's ridiculous. Midnight's used to me. That's what I told him, Gates agreed. But the banker wasn't interested in my opinion. Says he'll be bringing the horse back himself next week once his sister's gone. Fine, Rowan muttered, resuming his work with more force than necessary. Gates watched him for a moment before shaking his head. You know, for a man who's survived outlaws and prison, you sure are a coward when it comes to matters of the heart. Rowan slammed the hammer down, narrowly missing his thumb. What did you say? You heard me, Gates replied, unintimidated. That woman cares for you, Caldwell. God knows why, but she does. And instead of fighting for something good in your life for once, you're hiding in my stable feeling sorry for yourself. You don't understand, I understand plenty, Gates cut him off. You think you don't deserve happiness because of things you did years ago. Well, let me tell you something. I fought in the war between the states. Killed more men than I care to remember, some of them barely old enough to shave. You think I don't wake up some nights hearing their screams? You think I don't see their faces when I close my eyes? Rowan stared at his employer, seeing him in a new light. Gates had never spoken of his past before. The difference between you and me, Gates continued, his voice gruff with emotion, is that I eventually figured out that punishing myself for the rest of my life wouldn't bring any of them back. All it would do is waste whatever time I had left. Took me finding Martha to realize that. He mentioned his wife, who had passed away 2 years earlier. 20 good years we had together. 20 years I nearly denied myself because I thought I was too damaged to be loved. He turned to leave, then looked back at Rowan. Stage leaves at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, just so you know. Rowan spent a restless night turning Gates' words over in his mind. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He saddled Penny and rode to the small church at the edge of town, finding the minister, Reverend Walsh, tending his garden. Mr. Caldwell, the Reverend greeted him, surprise evident in his voice. Rowan had never attended services, though the minister had always nodded politely when they passed on the street. What brings you here so early? Need your advice, Reverend, Rowan said, dismounting. About redemption. The older man's eyebrows rose, but he gestured toward a bench beneath an apple tree. A subject close to my heart. Please sit. For the next hour they talked, Rowan haltingly at first, then with increasing openness about his past, his regrets, and his feelings for Beatrice. The Reverend listened without judgment, asking occasional questions but mostly allowing Rowan to speak his piece. So you see my dilemma, Rowan concluded. I care for her, more than I thought possible, but I don't know if I have the right to pursue those feelings, given who I am and what I've done. Reverend Walsh was silent for a moment, his weathered face thoughtful. Mr. Caldwell, forgiveness comes in many forms. There's legal forgiveness, which you've received through serving your sentence. There's divine forgiveness, which is available to all who sincerely repent. But perhaps the hardest kind to achieve is self-forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness, Rowan admitted. That's not for you to decide, the Reverend said gently. Forgiveness isn't earned, it's given, and from what you've told me, Miss Harrington is offering you that gift. The question is whether you're willing to accept it. And if accepting it brings her harm, damages her reputation or future prospects? That's a risk, certainly, Walsh acknowledged. But shouldn't she have a say in whether it's a risk worth taking? You've been making decisions for both of you, Mr. Caldwell. Perhaps it's time to let her choose for herself. Rowan considered this, watching the morning light filter through the apple tree's leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. And what if she chooses wrong? What if she regrets it? The Reverend smiled. That's the nature of free will, my friend. We all make choices, and sometimes we regret them. But I've found that the regrets we live with most painfully are not the things we did, but the things we didn't do when we had the chance. Rowan nodded slowly, the Reverend's words resonating with something deep inside him. Thank you, Reverend. Don't thank me yet, Walsh replied with a twinkle in his eye. The hard part's still ahead of you. An hour later, Rowan stood near the stagecoach office, watching as passengers began to gather for the 9 o'clock departure to Denver. He spotted Richard Harrington first, supervising the loading of several trunks onto the stage's roof. Then Beatrice appeared, dressed in a traveling suit of navy blue, her hair tucked neatly beneath a small hat adorned with a single feather. She looked pale and tired, as if she'd been sleeping as poorly as Rowan had. She spoke briefly with her brother before moving toward the stage where the driver was helping passengers board. Rowan stepped forward then, his heart hammering in his chest. Beatrice. She turned at the sound of his voice, her eyes widening. Rowan, what are you doing here? I needed to see you before you left, he said, acutely aware of the curious glances from other passengers and the darkening expression on Richard Harrington's face. To tell you something important. I believe you've said quite enough to my sister, Richard interjected, stepping between them. Your presence here is unwelcome, Caldwell. Richard, please, Beatrice said, placing a restraining hand on her brother's arm. Let him speak. The banker's jaw worked as he struggled with his anger, but he stepped aside, though he remained close enough to intervene if necessary. Rowan focused solely on Beatrice, the noise and activity of the busy street fading to background as he gathered his courage. I've been a fool, he began. A coward hiding behind my past, using it as an excuse to push away anything good that might come my way. Beatrice's expression softened slightly. Rowan, please let me finish, he interrupted gently. You were right. People can change. I have changed. But I've been so focused on what others think of me, so convinced I don't deserve a second chance that I nearly let the best thing that's ever happened to me walk away without a fight. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. I care for you, Beatrice. More than I thought possible, and if there's any chance you might feel the same, I'm asking you to stay. Not for me, but for us, for what we might build together. Her eyes searched his face, a tumult of emotions playing across her features. The town will never accept you, she said softly. We'd face endless prejudice and whispers. I know, he acknowledged. And if that's too high a price, I understand. I'll wish you well and let you go, but I had to tell you how I feel before you left, had to give us both the chance to choose. This is absurd, Richard cut in, unable to contain himself any longer. Beatrice, the stage is about to depart. You have a position waiting for you in Denver, respectable work among good people. Don't throw that away for this. Beatrice looked from her brother to Rowan, conflict evident in her expression. I need to think, she said. This is all so sudden. There's no time, Richard insisted. The stage leaves in minutes. Then it will have to leave without me, she decided, a new resolve entering her voice. I won't make a decision of this magnitude in haste. Richard's face reddened. You can't be serious. You would actually consider. What? A life with an outlaw, a murderer, a man, Beatrice corrected firmly. A good man who made terrible mistakes in his youth, but has been trying to atone for them ever since. A man who would rather deny himself happiness than risk causing me pain or hardship. She turned to Rowan, her gaze direct and unflinching. That's the man I've come to know. That's the man I've come to care for. Rowan's breath caught in his throat. Beatrice? I need time, she repeated, to be certain this is what I want, what we both want. Of course, he agreed, hope blossoming in his chest. Take all the time you need. Richard looked between them, his expression incredulous. This is madness, absolute madness. Beatrice, think of your reputation, your future. I am thinking of my future, she replied calmly. A future of my own choosing, not one dictated by society's expectations or even your well-meaning concerns, brother. The stagecoach driver called for final boarding, and Beatrice turned to him. I won't be traveling today, sir. Please remove my luggage. As the driver complied, grumbling about schedules and delays, Richard made one last attempt to persuade his sister. You'll regret this, he warned. When the novelty wears off and you're left with the reality of life with a man the whole town shuns, you'll wish you'd gotten on that stage. Beatrice took Rowan's hand, a gesture that sent a jolt of warmth through his entire body. Perhaps, she conceded, but I'd regret not finding out far more. The stagecoach departed in a cloud of dust, leaving the three of them standing on the street as curious onlookers began to disperse, no doubt eager to spread the news of the banker's sister and the outlaw. Richard shook his head in disgust. On your head be it, Beatrice. But don't expect me to welcome this relationship. I expect nothing, Richard, she replied. Except the basic courtesy one family member owes another. I'm not asking for your blessing, merely your respect for my decision. The banker looked as if he wanted to say more, but after a moment he simply turned and walked away, his rigid posture betraying his anger and disappointment. He'll come around, Beatrice said, though she sounded less than certain. Eventually. And if he doesn't? Rowan asked. She squeezed his hand. Then that's his choice, just as this is mine. They stood in the middle of the street, hands clasped, aware of the stares and whispers but finding strength in each other's presence. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be challenges ahead, prejudices to overcome, doubts to conquer. But it was a beginning, a choice made freely with open eyes and hopeful hearts. What happens now? Beatrice asked as they began walking, no particular destination in mind. I don't rightly know, Rowan admitted with a small smile. I didn't think quite this far ahead. She laughed, the sound like music to his ears. Well, I suppose I need to find lodgings. I can't very well continue to stay with Richard after this morning's drama. There's a decent boarding house near the church, Rowan suggested. Run by a widow named Mrs. Collins. She's fair-minded, might be willing to rent to you despite complications. Complications, Beatrice repeated, her lips quirking upward. Is that what we're calling this? For lack of a better term, he said, his own smile widening. Though I'm sure the town gossips will have plenty of colorful alternatives, they spent the day together, making arrangements for Beatrice's immediate needs and planning for the future. Mrs. Collins did indeed have a room available and, after a brief but thorough interview with Beatrice, agreed to rent it to her. I don't hold with judging folks based on hearsay, the older woman said, eyeing Rowan skeptically but not unkindly, and I've no patience for those who do. You keep your business to yourself, pay your rent on time, and we'll get along just fine. In the weeks that followed, Rowan and Beatrice faced exactly the challenges they'd anticipated. Richard maintained a cool distance, acknowledging his sister with rigid politeness when they happened to meet but making no effort to reconcile. The town was divided, some openly disapproving, others merely curious, and a few, like Gates and Mrs. Collins, supportive in their quiet way. Beatrice secured a position teaching at the small school on the outskirts of White River, her qualifications too impressive for the school board to reject despite reservations about her personal associations. Rowan continued working at the livery, grateful for Gates' unwavering employment. They took things slowly, their courtship conducted largely in public rides in the countryside, walks through town, occasional meals at the cafe where Rowan had once avoided dining. Each outing was a small act of defiance against the prejudice they faced, each shared moment a building block in their growing relationship. 3 months after the day at the stage-coach station, Rowan took Beatrice to the lake where they'd skipped stones together. The autumn air was crisp, the aspens blazing gold against the evergreen backdrop of pines. They sat on a fallen log, watching the late afternoon sunlight dance across the water's surface. "I've been thinking," Rowan said, breaking a comfortable silence. "About what the Reverend said to me that morning. About forgiveness," Beatrice asked. They'd spoken often of his conversation with Reverend Walsh, finding in his words a framework for understanding their own journey. "Yes," Rowan nodded. "He said forgiveness isn't earned, it's given. I've been thinking about all the people in my past that I've wronged, the ones still living, at least. I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can make amends in some way." "What are you proposing?" "Letters," he said simply, "to the families of the men who died because of me. Explaining what happened, offering what restitution I can. It won't bring their loved ones back, but at least they'll know the truth." Beatrice took his hand, her eyes shining with pride. "I think that's a wonderful idea, a courageous one." "I don't know if they'll forgive me," Rowan admitted. "Probably not, but offering them the truth is the least I can do. And if they reject your attempt, then I'll have to accept that," he said. "Just as I've had to accept that some people in this town will never see me as anything but what I once was." Beatrice's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, when I first arrived in White River, I thought I was just passing through a brief stop on my way to a different life. I never imagined I'd find reason to stay." "Do you regret it?" Rowan asked, the question that had lingered at the edges of his mind finally finding voice. "Choosing this life instead of the one you'd planned?" "Not for a moment," she said with conviction. "Teaching here has been more rewarding than I ever anticipated, and as for us—" She moved closer, her shoulder touching his. "I've never been more certain of any decision." Relief washed through him, followed by a surge of love so powerful it momentarily took his breath away. "I want to build a life with you, Beatrice," he said, the words coming straight from his heart. "A real life, not just stolen moments and public outings. I want a home with you, a family perhaps, if that's something you desire." She searched his face, her expression growing serious. "Are you proposing, Rowan Caldwell?" "Inelegantly, but yes," he confirmed with a nervous laugh. "I am." "Then ask me properly," she urged, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Rowan slid from the log to one knee, taking her hands in his. "Beatrice Harrington, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise an easy life, but I can promise to love you faithfully, to stand by you through whatever challenges we face, and to spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust and affection." Tears glistened in her eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Rowan." He rose and gathered her into his arms, his heart fuller than he'd ever thought possible. They stood together by the lake, the future stretching before them, uncertain in its details, but secure in its foundation of love and mutual choice. The wedding took place the following spring, a small, simple ceremony in Reverend Walsh's church. Gates served as Rowan's best man, while Mrs. Collins stood with Beatrice. Richard did not attend, though he sent a brief note acknowledging the union and a modest wedding gift, a concession that gave Beatrice hope for eventual reconciliation. Following the ceremony, they moved into a small house on the edge of town that Rowan had purchased with his carefully saved earnings. It wasn't grand, but it was solidly built and situated on enough land for a garden and perhaps eventually a few horses of their own. Life settled into a rhythm, Beatrice teaching during the day, Rowan working at the livery. Evenings spent together reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's presence. They faced continued challenges from those who couldn't accept their union, but they also found unexpected allies and friends who judged them by their present actions rather than past mistakes. 6 months after their wedding, Beatrice received a letter from Denver, an offer to contribute articles to a women's journal based on her experiences teaching in a frontier town. "They want monthly pieces," she told Rowan, her eyes bright with excitement. "About education, about life in the West from a woman's perspective. It's exactly the opportunity I dreamed of." "That's wonderful," Rowan said, genuinely happy for her. "Will you accept?" "Of course," she replied. "I can write in the evenings and send the pieces by post." It won't interfere with my teaching. The first article was published that summer under the byline B.H. Caldwell, a deliberate choice that made Rowan's chest swell with pride when he saw it in print. Other articles followed, each one gaining positive notice and eventually leading to a regular column that provided a welcome supplement to their modest income. Rowan, meanwhile, continued his own journey toward redemption. He wrote the letters he'd promised, sending them to the families of those who died by his hand or as a consequence of his actions. Most went unanswered, as he'd expected. But two responses did come, one a bitter denunciation that nonetheless provided a kind of closure, and another, remarkably, offering a measure of understanding if not quite forgiveness. "You were right," he told Beatrice after receiving the second letter. "About redemption being a journey, not a destination. I don't think I'll ever fully atone for the harm I've caused, but maybe I can balance the scales a bit by doing good where I can." "You already are," she assured him, "every day." A year into their marriage, Gates offered to sell Rowan the livery. "I'm getting too old for this work," the older man explained, "and there's no one I'd rather see take over. You know horses better than anyone in these parts, and you've proven yourself reliable and honest." The offer was unexpected but welcome. With Beatrice's teaching salary, her writing income, and a loan from the bank arranged through a colleague of Richard's, as the banker himself still refused to do business directly with Rowan, they were able to purchase the livery. Ownership brought new responsibilities, but also new respect from the community. It was harder to dismiss a business owner, a taxpayer, a man with a stake in the town's prosperity than it was to shun a hired hand with a shadowy past. As their second anniversary approached, Beatrice shared news that changed their lives once more. "I'm with child," she told Rowan one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Due in the winter, according to the doctor." Joy and terror warred within Rowan at her announcement. "A baby," he breathed, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our child. Are you happy?" she asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Beyond words," he assured her, gathering her close. "Though I confess I'm terrified as well. What do I know about being a father?" "You know about love," Beatrice said simply. "About patience and kindness and perseverance. The rest we'll figure out together." Their son, Samuel Gates Caldwell, was born on a snowy January night in 1879, with Mrs. Collins acting as midwife. He had Rowan's dark hair and Beatrice's hazel eyes, and from his first indignant cry, he held his parents' hearts completely in his tiny hands. Fatherhood transformed Rowan in ways he hadn't anticipated. The fierce protectiveness he felt toward his son, the overwhelming love, the sense of legacy and responsibility, all of it gave new meaning to his life and new purpose to his ongoing redemption. He was determined that Samuel would grow up knowing his father as a man of integrity and compassion, not the outlaw of years past. The arrival of Samuel also, unexpectedly, began to thaw the ice between Beatrice and her brother. Richard's wife insisted on visiting the baby, bringing their own children to meet their new cousin, and Richard reluctantly accompanied them. The meeting was stiff and awkward, but it was a beginning. Subsequent visits became gradually less formal, and by Samuel's first birthday, Richard was able to be in the same room as Rowan without visible discomfort. "He'll never fully approve," Beatrice observed after one such visit, "but he's trying for my sake and for Samuel's." "That's more than I expected," Rowan admitted, "and more than I probably deserve." Life continued to unfold, bringing joys and sorrows, triumphs and setbacks. Beatrice's writing career flourished, eventually leading to a commission for a book about education in the West. Rowan expanded the livery, adding a carriage service that met the trains at the newly constructed station. Samuel grew from an infant to a toddler to a curious, energetic boy who delighted in helping his father with the horses and listening to his mother's stories. When Samuel was 4, they welcomed a daughter, Martha Rose, named for Gates' late wife and Rowan's mother. Where Samuel was all energy and motion, Martha was thoughtful and observant, with a quiet determination that reminded Rowan powerfully of Beatrice. By the time Samuel was 10 and Martha 6, White River had grown from a frontier settlement to a proper town. complete with a brick schoolhouse where Beatrice now served as headmistress, a bank, still run by Richard, now considerably more cordial to his brother-in-law, and several new businesses along the main street. The Caldwell Livery and Carriage Company was a respected establishment, and the family occupied a larger home closer to town, though still with enough land for the children to run free and for Rowan to keep several horses of his own. Their life wasn't without challenges. Occasionally, someone would pass through town who recognized Rowan from his outlaw days, stirring up old gossip and reopening wounds that had begun to heal. But these incidents became rarer as the years passed, and the town's response to them changed. Increasingly, people defended the man they knew rather than condemning the man he had been. On a warm summer evening in 1889, as they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary with a family picnic by the lake where Rowan had proposed, Beatrice asked him a question. "Are you happy, Rowan?" Truly happy, he looked around at their children playing near the water's edge, at the comfortable life they'd built together, at the woman who had seen beyond his past to the man he could become. "I never thought I could be this happy," he answered honestly. "Never believed I deserved it." She leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "We all deserve a chance at redemption, at love, even former outlaws with too many regrets." "They'll never forgive me," he said softly, thinking not of the townspeople who had largely accepted him now, but of those nameless victims from his past, the ones who hadn't lived to see him change, the families left to mourn them. "Not completely." "I already did," Beatrice reminded him, echoing words she'd spoken years earlier. "And that forgiveness was a beginning, not an ending. Look at all we've built on that foundation." Rowan pulled her closer, overwhelmed by gratitude for this remarkable woman who had chosen him, believed in him, loved him through doubt and struggle. "You gave me my life back," he murmured against her hair, now streaked with the first strands of silver. "More than that, you gave me a life I never dreamed possible." As the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Rowan Caldwell held his wife close and watched his children laugh. The shadows of his past would always be there, but they no longer defined him. What defined him now was the love he gave and received, the trust he'd earned, the family he cherished, and the community that had, against all odds, become home. From gunslinger to husband, father, business owner, respected citizen, it had been a journey of atonement and growth, made possible by one woman's willingness to see beyond the label outlaw to the man beneath. Beatrice's forgiveness had been the first step on a path that had led them both to a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined that day, when a former outlaw and a banker's sister had first locked eyes on a dusty street in White River. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Rowan knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together with love, with courage, and with the unshakable knowledge that redemption, once found, could never truly be lost again.